Welcome to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, where we help business leaders and individual contributors with actionable insights to hit their number and figure out the nuances of truly operating a business globally today, squeezing the essence of the lessons learned from the planet's top tech leaders. This is your guide to joining the fast track to global market scaling.
Today, we're joined by Jimmy Kehoe. Jimmy is the head of digital sales at Vodafone. I've known Jimmy for many, many years. I was keen to have him on the show as somebody who's really grown up in a very much a sales ethos in through to leadership today. He's doing some incredible things by way of transforming organizations from a digital sales perspective, and he's a lot to say in that regard. So welcome to the show, Jimmy.
Hey, Ross. Glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
My absolute pleasure. Well, look, let's dive right in here. So take me through your career thus far to date. You know, what's brought you to where you are now and some of those kind of key inflection points and decision trees you took along the way, if you would.
Yeah, of course. How far back do you want to go? You want to go back to the beginning?
Well, I suppose you're a, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed coming out of education. Why did you go to where you went to? And, keep it summary in there, but
okay.
Those main points along the way.
Yeah. So why did I end up where I am? So I studied computer programming in Carlow Regional Technical College, or Carlow ITC as it is now. But very quickly, Ross realized I'm not smart enough to be a software developer, and realized this is not for me. And I ended up working in a company called DataPack many years ago as the computer repair guy. I was fixing computers, fixing stuff for customers. And I remember after a couple of years of that, doing really well at it, seeing the sales guys driving around in their BMWs while I was driving around in my Fiat Uno van, thinking to myself, what they're doing, they're out helping customers, they're out finding solutions. They seem to have a good life. They're getting paid a lot more money than I was getting paid, and they're not doing anything that I don't think I could do. So at the time, I had a conversation with the MD at the time, a guy called David Laird, and David backed me and said, yeah, you know what, Jimmy, we think you could be a sales guy. And literally gave me a set of accounts, gave me a mobile phone at the time, a car, a set of accounts, and a target, and off you go. And ended up in sales. In a very different path to the way people get into sales nowadays, when they sometimes start as an SDR and work their way up and inside sales, then move to the field. None of that existed back then, because inside sales didn't really exist except maybe in Dell. So it was into sales, couple of accounts, target, off you go, and found my home and loved it. Found I was really good at it. I could empathize with people. I could listen. I could help them find problems. I could leverage my technical background to have an insightful conversation quickly to fix some pain. And before I knew it, I was leading a small team, and that started my journey in management. And again, at the time, very little formal education about how to be a manager. But I went off and started reading and did lots of my own work with reading with Ken Blanchard. So that was my Bible around how to be a manager and how to be a leader. The 1 minute manager.
I've been through it many times. It's fantastic.
And it's so simple and fundamental. But if you're coming into your first manager's job, if you can go and read Ken Blanchard's 1 minute manager and learn not to be the chief problem solver, not to be carrying the monkey on your back, and learn how to trust and delegate and give people autonomy to go and be themselves without trying to micromanage them, it'll set you off on the right path really quickly. So that's what I did. So studied Ken Blanchard's books, and they're still here behind me on the bookshelf. Interestingly, my wife is studying, my wife's a college lecturer, and she's studying leadership herself. And she asked me, where should she start? And there she got the 4 little books from Ken Blanchard, read those. And again, all really insightful. So started there, got my first management gig. And by then I'd probably been working for 10 years at that stage, but only kind of 3 or 4 that was in sales. And then ended up in VMware for a couple of years and ran the channel for VMware. So that was an individual contributor role, but ultimately ended up as the country manager for VMware. Went back to DataPack then as their as their sales director, so running the whole sales organization. So I'd gone from managing a couple of people at DataPack to back running the whole sales organization. And did that for a couple of years, and then took my first step into inside sales. And that was in Oracle in Dublin. And a guy called Killian O'Grady, who you may know, Killian backed me, gave me my first job in inside sales. And the reason I went to that, Ross, was obviously because we saw back in those days in Dublin in the early, the 2010s-ish, 2005, 2010s, 2015-ish, a lot of the US companies that were landing into Europe were coming to Dublin, London, or Amsterdam. So there was lots of opportunity to develop and for sales leadership roles in those sort of organizations. So I spent an amazing couple of years at Oracle, and I learned more in those 4 years at Oracle than I probably had in the rest of my whole career. More formally, in terms of your leadership development and teaching you just sales skills and leadership skills that you just don't get working for some of the smaller organizations where you become successful by hard work and effort and a bit of luck. There's a program that you go through in those larger organizations, which I was lucky to benefit from. And that, working with some amazing leaders. So Gavin, I worked for Gavin for a couple of years in there. Amazing guy to learn from and still mentors me to this day. And David from DataPack still mentors me. So those couple of leaders were amazing to still work with or to still learn from. So that was Oracle for a couple of years. Had an amazing time, and then since then I've spent some time at EMC. Had an amazing time with Software AG, where we built their inside sales organization for them here in Dublin. A couple of years there. I'm kind of really showing my age now, and then the last 3 years have been an amazing time at Vodafone, where I'm running the B2B inside sales organization. So that's the journey.
So let's get into that. So some notable takeaways there for sure. And I suppose one of the things that I try and convey to our listeners is how dramatically things have changed in the last 20 years. I had an old friend of mine, Ryan Schertzer, on the show a number of years ago. Last season, should I say, that we worked together a number of years ago, whereby, he said that there seems to be a them and us with outside sales and inside sales, that one is inferior to the other and vice versa. And that's not the case at all. And I actually think, and this is well seen across the SaaS space in particular, where organizations are born inside, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
The reason for that is you can be more agile, you can be more profitable, you can convey messages. And it's particularly relevant in a pandemic where you can't go and visit customers. It's just not allowed, or prospects. And actually it forces you to be more articulate, to be more empowering and emotive with tools like, Zooms and live demos and trials and so on. But maybe could you just share with us some of your learnings from that massive shift of what I call old school selling and marketing, where marketing was, we print a brochure, and sales was, well, the printed brochure goes under the arm of the sales guy who goes out in his car and visits someone and talks the talk and hopes for the best and does a handshake. So what's that shift been like for you in terms of inside selling and the demands on inside guys these days? And what's been your learning throughout that process, if you could share with us?
Yeah, got it. It absolutely is a transformation. Lots of points to your questions there, Ross. So if I don't address them all, make sure and drag me back to answer. The first piece around the value of inside sales has changed so much, right? So again, in the old days, inside sales was typically the bag carrier for the field sales guy, right? And was in the back office doing some admin stuff. Thankfully those days are gone, and are gone for a long time. When you see all of the tech natives that are starting up now, and then starting for the last 10 or 15 years, they start inside first, right? That's what they do. You look at all of the organizations that are landing out of the US into Dublin, Amsterdam, or London, they're typically serving their corporate or their commercial customers from a digital / inside sales perspective first. And their largest enterprise are still served with white glove. And there's lots of reasons that's happening. Let's look at some of them. Firstly, it was happening before COVID anyway. But if you go back and look at some of the stats, I have a paper that we put together within Vodafone that talked about this change that's happening. And some of the stats are amazing. So Salesforce had a stat that showed 92% of a field sales rep's interaction with a customer was digital anyway. And just think about that. So even though the sales guy is going out to see people, actually 92% of their interactions are digital anyway, because they're doing email, they're doing phone calls, they're doing quick catch-ups, they're doing presentations online. So they're doing all that anyway, right? So and what you found then is, there was another stat, I think it may have been Forrester, and apologies if I'm misquoting some of the analysts there, that 70% of people actually don't really want, and this is pre-COVID, don't really want to see people face-to-face anymore anyway, for specific types of purchases. So if you're a customer and buying something that you're comfortable with, and remember the stat from Gartner, so 62% of the buying journey is completed now before anybody ever sees a salesperson.
Yeah.
Right. And that's because the customers are more knowledgeable. Because I know we're not in video here, but the first thing that you do, if the customer thinks, I've got a problem, I need something X, what's the first thing they do? They'll pick up their phone, they'll swipe up, and they'll open Chrome or Safari or whatever it is and Google something. So, and they've gone and done that level of research before they ever speak to a sales guy. So they've gone much further along the journey before they ever need to speak to anybody from sales. And we'll talk to you about the value of marketing now in the modern buying journey in a second. So your customer has gone much further along the buying journey than they traditionally would when I was a sales guy. When I was a sales guy, I was out educating the customer. Now the customer is educated, and when I come to him or her, I need to be adding some value that's different than coming in trying to qualify them. I can't do that. I can't just rock in and, so tell me about your business. It's like, why would you expect me to do that? So that buying journey has changed, and Inside allows people to be much more responsive to that, because, as I said, customers now don't necessarily want to see people anymore because they don't have time. They don't want to book a car park space. They don't want to do all the coffee stuff. They're buying something that they have done their research on, and they're ready and they know what they need. So what they're looking for is somebody who's responsive, knowledgeable, and who can meet their demands and meet them quite quickly. You know, let's have a 25-minute call. Let's do it on Zoom. Let's do it on Teams. Let's just do a telephone call. Let's get that done and let's move on. And that's what because customers are now more knowledgeable, they're happier to engage that way. Now, don't get me wrong. There still is absolutely the need. If you're transforming something within an organization, if you're rolling out a global ERP, or you're massively transforming some aspect of their business, you absolutely do need somebody. You know, there will be people on site and there will be all that engagement. But if you're buying a SaaS service or any sort of service that's not transformational, that the sales cycle is, a couple of months, that's all now digital. And it can be all done digitally, and the customers expect that to be. Let me answer your point about marketing, where marketing needs to change is. So let's go back to that stat from Gartner that says 62% of the buying journey is done before they speak to a sales guy. So they're not going to speak to the sales guy. So the question marketing has to answer now, and some organizations are answering this really well, is how do you get in front of that? And how do you be front of mind for your customer when they don't even know, they're not talking to you, they're not actively going out to you. So what's marketing's answer? And as you said, it's not printing out the brochures and giving them to the sales guys to go anymore, because nobody does that anymore. Nobody needs the physical brochures, and not nobody, but most people don't need those physical brochures. They need to be getting ahead of the customer buying journey, so that when the customer is starting that research and they go and look for, okay, so I've a problem, I need to improve my sales productivity by 15%. And I search that. What am I going to find? That's where marketing now comes into play, to be ahead of that buying journey and are there and present when the customer starts looking for solutions. So they're finding you, and then you've on your website or through your social channels, you're adding value, and you're constantly nurturing those people and letting them know, look, yeah, I'm here. This is what I do. And marketing play such a valuable role now in creating that early demand and bringing people to you. Again, to go back to the old days of cold calling, like cold calling still has a place. right? But it's not very efficient. Whereas if you've got your marketing engine turned on properly, and marketing is finding the right people, nurturing them, is capturing when they've interacted with some of your content or some of your social. And then, you know, if I'm trying to get in touch with Ross and I know that you've touched some of my content and you've engaged with us socially, so then when I go and have a conversation with you, I'm bringing insight, I'm bringing knowledge, I'm bringing experience, and I'm bringing the comment to go, look, Ross, I know you've engaged with some of our content. By the way, here's another paper you might be interested in. And then I'm nurturing you and I'm bringing value. I'm not cold calling you out of the blue to try and qualify you, because that's just like, from a customer experience perspective, like, welcome to the 80s. You just don't do that sort of stuff anymore, right? So that's all the stuff that I think is going on. I don't know, did I answer all the bits of your question?
Yeah, no, I think that's very much the case, and that's been my experience as well. I think from my own kind of learnings, HubSpot really taught me that it's all about giving away value up front, and being front and center of a decision-making process that is already underway. And the stat they used to say was, from their own research, it was up to 70% of the buying journey is actually done. So what Brian Halligan, the CEO of HubSpot, always says is, ABH, always be helping. So as you said, if somebody's downloaded content, they're like, okay, looks like you're investigating the following. Where are you at in that process? And here's another supplementary piece of content, video-led tutorial, perhaps a white paper, an ebook, etc. Or, you know, in a lot of cases, trials. So, you know, my wife works in Oracle, and that's one of their big go-to markets now. They're shifting from being kind of an old school upsell outreach piece to being very much a trial-led engagement model based on consumption. And then the beauty part is that if you know, an Oracle cloud platform has been seeded into a potential prospect, you can check their homework to see what work they're doing therein. And hold people accountable from that perspective. It's a completely different way of working. I'm curious to know, from your own experience and anecdotally, with this you know, new way of working. And traditionally the tools of the trade would have been a car, as you mentioned, you know, maybe a black book, and then a mobile phone or a walk around phone, as someone used to say when they first came out that I knew. They were the tools of the trade, right? Nowadays, and my dad always says that business is all about relationship, and I still think that's the case, and that's not going to go away. But those are the tools of the trade. What other tools do you see in your organization? Maybe if you could share with us a bit about what Vodafone do, where they've moved to in this digital age, and then also what are the tools that I might have as a sales rep in my arsenal, or my desk drawer, my virtual desk drawer, as it were, that let me know that a prospect is doing these activities that might be relevant to me?
A really good question. So again, it's transformed hugely in the last 10 years, and even actually here in Europe, we're still a couple of years behind what you see some of the really advanced tech companies in the US doing. Like, interestingly, I was having a conversation with a colleague who runs a field sales organization in the US recently, and he was upset by his version of me, who was telling him that the fully loaded cost included about $7,000 of technology, and he couldn't get this because my field reps, he said, only cost me €1,000 for my CRM license. Why is the inside guy costing me $7,000? And and when I went through, but that's the value, right? That's the differentiator for the inside guy versus the field guy, because they're using so much tools and technology to give them data to help them be more efficient. Because again, go back to what inside sales was 10 years ago. It was effectively corporate account management just behind the phone. But that's progressed now to where digital management or digital account management is that same behind a virtual piece of technology, whether it's a phone or a video, but we're layering them up with tools and technology and data to help them be more efficient. So the tools that a modern digital sales organization is using. So clearly we're heavily reliant on social, because you look at, you know, most CEOs in B2B tech of a large organization are somehow engaged in using social to research or to learn or to connect, right? So it's using social, and not social the way I presume you get them as well. You get that random LinkedIn connection, and you know, and 3 minutes later you get the pitch. You know, it's not that. Absolutely not. It's the using it to nurture and to build relationships and interact and not blast, and using it as a conversation. The same way we use video and voice, social is just another way to have a conversation. And you should have a conversation with Liam Halpin at LinkedIn someday about this. He's super passionate about it. So use social to have that conversation. That's absolutely a core tool that we use, especially for our corporates. You know, SMEs are not always on it, but it's some are, but absolutely using social. Using data is a core part of what we have to do now. Again, in the old days of here's a Rolodex and here's a list of people, just go call them. Again, not very efficient. So what we've been building out over the last couple of years, not just us, most advanced digital sales organizations are using propensity to help guide the reps on what they should be selling. So that's finding the customers in an industry of a certain type, of a certain size, at a certain scale, a certain maturity, who've bought certain products, and maybe many other criteria, depending on the markets and segments and so on. And likely they should buy something like this because organizations similar to them have already bought it. So we've invested heavily in using AI to help guide where our reps should be talking to people and who they should be talking to and the conversations they should be having. And that's all based on the more data you can pump into the machine, the more insights it's able to give you back. So AI and propensity is huge. And even where one of the tools we've trialed and we haven't rolled it out yet is looking at the inbound SDR function and actually replacing that with an AI engine, right? Because a lot of that inbound query can be handled by AI. So we haven't done that yet, but that's definitely something that is future tech that organizations will look at. Clearly, the message is now clear. This need for face-to-face video has changed, or sorry, face-to-face meetings has changed, and we're now all comfortable, whether we like it or not, we're comfortable now on Teams and on Zoom and on whatever that may be to interact with people. So using video absolutely is a core part of it. We have there's some really cool tech, and I don't want to go mention the individual technologies unless you want me to, Ross. There's some really cool tech now to help understand the rep conversations that they're having. So there's this new wave of technology called revenue intelligence or conversational intelligence. So you can understand the conversations that your reps are having, and there's a couple of different companies doing this. Understand the conversations that they're having and what are the insights you can use there to help coach your rep, but equally to help understand the macro impact across the economy and your customer base. You know, what are the trends and what are you seeing, what are you hearing? Because you're not relying on a rep telling you, you're using an artificial intelligence engine to take the insights out of those calls. Some really cool stuff happening there. And then around, how do you engage customers at scale? Again, how can those, one of the ways digital sales reps can be more productive, obviously, is because they're not traveling, they can cover more customers. But covering more customers doesn't necessarily mean they're going to be more productive from a sales perspective, because that could just mean more problems and more customer issues to deal with. So how do you enable them to go outbound at scale in a personalized way, but with a lot of automation into it? So, there's a lot of companies, like Sales Often Outreach, doing some really cool stuff to help outbound at scale. There's some of the really cool stuff that's happening. The AI piece really excites me around how we can help our reps be more productive. We're never going to replace our sales teams with AI. Well, I don't think we are. Certainly not in my lifetime. Well, that could be proven to be completely wrong in 5 years from now. Who knows? But with the pace, the way things are changing. But I still think back to what your dad said, right? Sales is about humans and people and relationships. That's not going to change. All of these tools and technologies that are accessible to inside sales organizations typically are just helping them be more productive and be more efficient and cover more customers at scale.
So I fully agree with that. It's interesting what you said about AI. We've deployed AI in our data set quite recently, and it's been transformative to our business in terms of where we're finding inflection points. And, you know, I always say that our value is not in, you know, a premises we may have purchased. Our value is in the data that we have.
Yeah.
I suppose
data is the new, I can't remember who said it, but data is the new oil. I think it might have been LinkedIn. I think that might have been LinkedIn.
Reid Hoffman probably, yeah, I would imagine. Yeah, indeed. And that's exactly right. And if you haven't figured out why you're not paying, you're the product. I think is another one. That, you know, that Google know effectively what you're doing nowadays. They know how you think because they can track where you are, what your patterns are, etc. Yeah. And I suppose what's fascinating is that you could be on a chatbot on a website doing a query and actually not be speaking with a human being, but a machine.
Yeah. And that's the point around that, you know, that inbound query. You know, you download a white paper and all of a sudden you get an email immediately from a chatbot to say, hey, Ross, I see you downloaded a paper. Can I help? Here's something else you might be interested in. And it's taken some data based on the industry and your company size and the metrics and the data you have to prompt you with the right content. And it'll keep going with you and nurture you and keep you going until, you know, you trigger something that means you need to speak to a real human, but you don't even know that. And this stuff's really effective.
One of the things that I suppose I found in hardware was that the close rate was pretty high. I found that, you know, when I worked at Dell, it was very much a functional requirement, right? It was, you need to have this product, and you know, you've negotiation, you've decision maker, and you get the deal done type of stuff. And I found, particularly in software, the big shift is that, yes, there's functional requirements, but a vast majority of it is what I call an evangelical sale, which is, this is a nice to have. If I look at HubSpot, that's very much the case. It's, your business isn't going to fall over without this product, but it does have the opportunity to transform the way that you actually work. So there's a mind shift there. There's a transformation. Everyone's talking about digital transformation. I think is largely overused, quite frankly, because it doesn't really mean anything. But it actually, when you boil it down, means, for me at least, a different way of working. But what that means from a sales rep's perspective is that often there's no end of opportunity. Actually, those days are gone. You know, the cold calling days of old Gil from The Simpsons, please buy for me, I really need this one type of stuff. Yeah, they're really gone. There's actually no end of opportunity. What's actually more important to recognize today is, where am I going to spend my time? You touched on this a little earlier, to get the best possibility of closing an opportunity. So close rates go down, but where you focus your time to build your pipe, to get your close rate in sync with your targets and overachieving your targets, quite frankly, are really the crucial inflection points that I talk about today, that I see are vital for reps. So I suppose my question to you, Jimmy, is like, what do you find from a prospect behavioral standpoint really is the difference that makes the difference, that helps you have an element of self-qualification from the prospect's perspective? And I do this in recruitment all the time. I get candidates to self-qualify. It's, you tell me why, you know, we should work together. And same with clients. And then I have a conversation, because our time's all valuable. But what do you find are the inflection points that make the difference in business, where you can actually say with a level of certainty that pipeline is closable?
So if I can try and read back what I think you're trying to ask me, Ross, is what are the key things we're looking for to understand the quality of an opportunity? Yes. Okay. So we've, like any sales organization, have had our challenges around spending lots of time on opportunities that we're just being dragged along, and we're not really engaged properly, or we are being used as that third quote. It's happened to us all. So we've put a lot of work over the last year into our upfront qualification. And we've rolled out a really tight methodology based on one of the industry standard methodologies to help us, again, don't want to mention the name, but to help us understand really quickly, do we understand what the customer is trying to do? Do we understand how they're going to measure that this will be a success, or will be a worthwhile, or that there is a return from what they're going to do? Are we speaking with somebody who's a champion and who can support us and who can help us through this journey? Or are we being kept at arm's length, and it's an email conversation with, give me your quote by this day next week? So we've rolled out a methodology that we're rolling out across our whole organization to not across the whole organization, across some of our organization at first, to understand the strength of and to be able to measure and put a score around an opportunity that, one, shows us the strength of it, but secondly, shows us are we engaged correctly, and if we're not, where are the gaps. Now, interestingly, that right now is it's a work process, and it's a way of operating, and it's an operating model effectively that we're rolling out from a sales qualification perspective. But again, back to the technology question, that will be superseded in the next couple of years as technology matures. So if you go back to the revenue intelligence comment earlier, there's some amazing technology with organizations like Clary or like Outreach, who have some really cool technology that, and even Salesforce Einstein, that puts an AI lens on your forecast, and it can put an AI lens on your opportunity and look at the gaps and look at your stale pipeline and just basically give you a picture of, you know what, your organization, your team are telling you the forecast is this, but actually the artificial intelligence, the AI engine is saying, you know what, BS to that. It's nowhere near that, because based on the trends and what we've seen historically, and based on where your deals are and the velocity or lack of velocity on deals, actually this is where we think you're going to be. And that's going to play more and more an important part in the next couple of years in terms of how we qualify and how we forecast. You know, yes, the art and the science of forecast, but I think the data is going to drive that and make it much more accurate, and again help us to be much more productive as that technology matures in the next years.
I think what's the most exciting thing to me is that technologies like this remove ambiguity. It removes politics. It removes the sort of gut feel element. I mean, I used to manage a sales rep, it's well over 10 years ago now, and he had an unbelievable ability to get into some really high profile accounts and generate some great pipeline. And you know, he was talking to serious global players, which would have been, you know, quite frankly, you know, a quarter's target in one rep's, you know, one deal, that sort of stuff. But the man couldn't close his desk drawer, quite frankly, all due respect to him, right? And he used to come to me and say, I said, okay, well, why is this based on, you know, the classic BANT? Why is this? And it was the days when, you know, you have to actually add notes to your CRM, you know, and he wasn't willing to do this. He was of the old school. And I said, well, why is this deal going to happen? I have a good feeling. And I said, do you want me to go to the VP of Europe and tell them that my sales rep has a good feeling about a deal? And, you know, we kind of laugh about it now. But I suppose what technology has done is, I'm particularly interested in the sales conversations piece. I've explored it myself as well, and one I feel very, very good about. But I think it allows you to remove the, you know, gut feel, the feelings, all that sort of stuff, the emotion, quite frankly. Not that it's a cold-hearted thing, but it's actually making decisions based on data. In God we trust, all others bring metrics, as one of my leaders used to say to me. And I love that, because that's the way it should be. And I suppose, from your own perspective, shifting gears here slightly, how do you feel leadership has changed over the course of your career, Jimmy? Because I'm a big follower of the Ken Blanchard School of Management. I went through the courses. We had it done in Quest. It was how we lived, you know, the D1s to D4s and the S1s to S4s, supporting coaching styles and all that kind of stuff. How do you feel technology has helped, and what has leadership changed from the old school, you know, the beatings will continue until morale improves kind of methodology, right? To the, I dare say, other extreme today, where you have the snowflake generations of millennials who, bless them, really, you know, and as, you know, some of the conservative movement would say, haven't been through a war. They don't know what hardship actually means. Their Instagram followers aren't up at the level they expect this week, that kind of stuff. Snowflake territory. What does that shift look like in your world from a leadership perspective, Jim?
Oh God, yeah. So look, it has changed, and I know this is an obvious thing, right? It has changed massively from days of, as you say, the beatings will continue until morale improves, to you know, a very modern, people-centric leadership style. And I've been lucky. I never I never had the old school and the old style. I never worked for that type of leader who would beat you until you beat you into submission until you did what you were supposed to do or what you were told to do. I've been very lucky through my whole career, everybody I worked with were effectively coaches or supporters at heart. So my all I've ever seen is supporting and coaching. That's all I've ever seen. And I've worked for some amazing coaches. So that transformation for me just felt natural, right? Because I didn't, as I said, never worked for that. So for me, it's not a big change. And I haven't had to change my style or adapt my style. So I'm quite comfortable with it all. And it just kind of felt like the right thing to do. In terms of the current generation and the snowflakiness, like there is a bit of that, and there's a good bit of entitlement. And so my family have a small hotel. I don't work in it, but my brothers do, and my dad still does. My mum is retired out of it. She got sense, got out of it. And they've effectively been closed now, Ross, for a year, right? We're coming to the end of it, but they've been closed and out of work for a year. And that's incredibly tough. And lots of SMEs and organizations like that have not been working for a year, or maybe work for a couple of months. And yet people in our industry and in the tech industry, our persecution is we've had to work from home, right? And I don't know if we value the privilege that we all have.
I agree.
That we're still getting paid, we're still working. Yeah, maybe we're not doing 120%, but you know what? We're working. The economy is still going for us. We're still earning. We're still able to support our families. And yeah, stuff is changing. And stuff is tough. But actually, we haven't got. Back to your point. We're not going through wars. We're not going through things like that. And we're still here. And I think there's a little bit of people not realizing how lucky we are, and not realizing how handy we have it versus the other side of the country or the other side of the economy that doesn't. And sometimes that does cause me a bit of frustration.
No, I couldn't agree with you more. And this is obviously a much bigger political discussion, but I think there's a few stats that have really struck me recently just from having conversations with people. 40% of the country are not working at the moment in the hospitality sector, in the service industry, etc. And the other side of that coin is that, I'm very privileged as well, as is my wife. We're both in this space whereby we are working, albeit from home, and actually, quite frankly, we have a good quality of lifestyle as a result of that. And I feel privileged because I went through bad times. I went through the 08s, the 010s, and the times when pennies were pinched, and quite frankly, there was Armageddon on the cards, and a good recession. I would argue, in a different way to the 80s and what our parents went through, but equally hard, and a vast majority of wealth was stripped away. And one of the interesting stats as well is that the mortgage market has not seen a decline. I know several brokers who said business is absolutely booming at the moment because the people who are in the mortgage market are doing better and better and better and better, and they're becoming wealthier, while others are left behind. And we have houses that are going in days, and there's two houses near where I am, they were sold within a number of days of each other, and people can't even view the things. That's insane. Things have gotten.
A friend of mine was trying to buy a small holiday home in Kerry recently, and it was advertised that it was a doer-upper. It was advertised that I think it might have been 60 or 70 grand, and he thought, you know what, I might get this for 80, 85. I think it went for 160, and it needs 100 grand done on it. And it's just, there's still a lot of buoyancy out there. But then, as you said, there's a lot of people.
Absolutely. David McWilliams' podcast, which I would be a big subscriber to as well. There's houses going relisting, they're falling out. They're relisting them at the 60 to 70 grand that they were at sale agreed on, if maybe a sales falls through, they're relisted at that price and it'll still go up another 60 or 70 grand. And some of them don't even have feckin' central heating. You know, like, what are you doing? So I think it's interesting. Another interesting stat that, you know, and there's also a generation that are left behind who haven't reinvented themselves and talk about this old school thing, is that in the US, 70% of millionaires are first-time millionaires. So there's kind of constant churn and recycling and adaptation of technology and a flow. And I suppose the only constant is change. And that really epitomizes it for me. You know, and yeah, albeit we're all very lucky in where we are. And I think that's the point, is that we need to be grateful and respect that fact and be hyper aware. So just kind of as we conclude here, Jimmy, maybe if you could just share with me, you know, some insights into kind of what does culture, and I suppose I often speak to CEOs who have taken the plunge into Europe or are about to, and I'm trying to convey this idea of the crack, CRAIC, just for clarification, not the narcotic variety, as I have to keep saying. What is it that means to you, and how do you define culture, and how do you lead and promote culture and value set when you're heading up an organization?
Yeah. So for me, culture is answered by the question of, how does it feel in your gut? How does it feel to work in an organization or work with an organization? Or, you know, what's that feeling you get? You know, does it feel like this is a really good place who cares about their people and cares about their future? You know, or is it a pure performance driven, you know, crack the whip, beating, you know, get on the phone, drive numbers? What does it feel like? So that's what culture means for me. And that's what I think about when I think about what's the culture in an organization. And how we create it clearly comes from the tone and the attitude and the behaviors of the leadership team. And in any organization I'm leading, I'm very focused on trying to create an organization where people feel like they have a voice. Everybody has a voice. Everybody has an opinion. Even though, yes, there's organizational hierarchy, actually we're trying to create a really flat organization that anybody can pick up the phone and talk to you, and everybody's accessible. We're all human, and we're not, you know, there's no corner office where Jimmy sits in and, you know, do not go there. Trying to create that really comfortable organization that everyone feels everybody's equal and everybody has a job to do and we're all here to support. That's the sort of organization culture I try and create, that one where people feel they're empowered, they're supported, they're happy to go and do their job, they're not micromanaged, and they can go and take some risks and not be too worried about it, that we're going to fail, because, you know, failure is fine. All you're doing is capturing some data and we learn from it and move on. So that's kind of where I try and focus, but that comes from the top and the leadership team and the way we all interact and the way we all behave, because you can have your corporate values and your corporate mission statements on the posters around the wall or the virtual posters, but it means nothing if we're not living it. And if the organization is not seeing that, you know, middle and upper management driving that and behaving that way, then it's irrelevant. So that's my perspective on it. That's where I try and focus. That's the kind of organization and culture I want. I want it to feel like for people, and I accept it comes from me and my team.
Show the way, know the way, and go the way. I often heard it referred to as live and I also, there's another methodology I use as well called servant leadership, which is like, again, this idea of always be helping. It's not that you're subservient, but you're there to serve your people who are representing you.
Absolutely.
Help and enable them. If you give them every tool to help them and enable them and encourage them and coach them, really. And that was one of the things I learned in Dell, was that in order to be a leader, you actually had to be a coach first. And I think that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Because that's your job. Okay, well, look, I really want to thank you for appearing today. I think our listeners will get some great value out of this, and I'd love to have you on again if you're open to it.
Absolutely, Ross. Thank you very much. It was great. Thanks for having me.
Great stuff. All righty.
You've been listening to the Global Tech Leaders Podcast, designed for both established and aspiring career-focused tech rock stars, as well as helping leadership figure out how to speak global in today's multicultural world. For further details, check out sf-talent.com.